Welcome back, everybody, to the next Aid Station podcast with your host, Jake Kilgore. Today's guest, super pumped and very, very excited. He needs no introduction, but is going to get a very big introduction from me. Jeff Browning, husband and father of three. The man is a living legend and a timeless wonder. So he's currently coaching a bunch of athletes. He's still competing at an incredibly high level, finishing over 140 or 150 ultras, somewhere in that large range. But he's also won 29 100-mile races. Jeff, how you doing, man?
Good to be on. Yeah, I think I'm approaching near 200 ultramarathon finishes. I lost count at like 180. I don't even, I mean, at 150, 160, I lost count, and that was like a lot of years ago. So, I need to know at some point, there's so many races that aren't on ultra sign up from the old school days that I need to probably I started a spreadsheet at one time. I need to go revisit it at some point. I will at some point, but I don't know. I just always say I'm about 200, and then probably in another year or two, you'll hear me say a little over 200, 200 plus finishes.
I knew the number was really high when I saw that ultra sign up said 144, because that's not all of them. I'm like, okay, it's definitely over that. So a lot of years, multiple at this point decades of running and competing at a high level. As I kind of scanned a lot of your races, just to give a little more background, multiple top 10s in Western, including a podium. You've won Hard Rock, the Hurt 100, Bear. You've kind of, what's that?
I said Wasatch right in your backyard.
Yep. Wasatch in my literal backyard. The starting line of the DC Peaks 50, which is also happens to be the starting line of the Wasatch 100. But most recently, this year in 2023, you won the Cocodona 125 and also the Bighorn 100, which kind of set you up for the Rocky Mountain Slam, which is for you, Bighorn, Wasatch, and Bear. But before we jump into and then Hard Rock, but you only have to do 3 of the 4?
No, you do 4. You do 4 races out of, well, they've redone it this year. There's a new Rocky Mountain Slam 2.0, but the original was you had to do Bear and you had to do Hard Rock, and then you pick 2 of 3 from Bighorn, Leadville, and Wasatch. But you had to do Bear because it's the last one in the series. That's where they give out the award. And then you had to do Hard Rock in the previous version of the Rocky Mountain Slam, which is what I was following. And then I found out they were doing Cody Draper, who took over the Bear 100. They kind of kicked off a Rocky Mountain Slam 2.0 because it's so hard to get into Hard Rock now. They've added multiple races to that list. I think Wyoming Range 100 and
Ouray, I think.
Yep, Ouray 100. And I think they're going to add the rumor is that they might add Scout Mountain 100 in Pocatello next year. So there'd be quite a few on that list, and you have to do Bear as the only one, and now you just have to pick 3 others out of the 4.
Is this your first time doing the Rocky Mountain Slam?
Yes. I've done a lot of slam style, back-to-back hundreds, a lot of grouped up stuff over the years. I've done the Western States Hard Rock double multiple times and thrown in a Bear in those years sometimes. So I have quite, I've done 400s a year for a lot of years. So I'm used to doing it. So this year I'm doing 6 just to get 52 finishes. I just turned 52 in August. So that was my wife's idea for me to go get 6 this year. Instead of doing Cocodona 250, she said, go equal your age in finishes, 100-mile finishes. So that was to get me from like doing Cocodona 250, and it worked, but it only postponed it a year.
I did notice that, and that was my next topic. As we jump into that, I talked to Mike McKnight about that, and then I saw it on your ultra sign up. But I want to jump into that. But before we do, talk to us about the Cocodona 125. I mean, start to finish, you looked really strong, at least from the comfort of my own couch, you look strong. But how'd you feel? I know there's that massive climb around what, mile 100 or 90 or something. Walk me through that course and how you felt doing a 125-mile distance.
Well, when they added that, I mean, it's right in my backyard. A lot of the course I run on kind of semi-regularly. And I just wanted to kind of link up that last 125 with the idea that I would be doing Cocodona 250 at some point. So it was more of a scouting trip for me, just to run it in one continuous run instead of scouting it in sections. I felt like that was kind of a cool way to do it, to put it in a race setting. So that's why I jumped into the race when I heard about it. And then, for me, I just relaxed and ran my own race. So I just happened to not have any major competition in it. So I just kind of cruised and enjoyed the aid stations and tried to just kind of put down a good consistent time and check out the race and not blow myself up. And it definitely left some on the course. There's a lot of room for that course record to come way down. With competition, especially, I didn't have any competition. So I think I was 7 or 8 hours in front of second. So there was no pressure. And so when there's no pressure, you're not going to perform even if you're trying to run faster, you still aren't going to perform at the level you would if you had competition. So it was great. It's basically kind of, you run down out of Jerome and across, through Cottonwood, Dead Horse State Park, and work your way. And that's kind of a winter training ground for me, is Dead Horse State Park. I do some long runs there in the wintertime, drive down to the desert, especially if it looks like it might be more socked in Sedona or something during the winter. And then you cruise over to Sedona and cut through Sedona. So I'd run a ton of those trails. I was very familiar with all that stuff. And just never had linked it up in the exact order that the race is in. And then you do the Kasner climb, cross Oak Creek, and climb up onto the rim. I'd never done any of that stuff on those dirt roads. And that's the part I really wanted to scout, because that's one of those like kind of boring scouts, if you're ever going to do it, where it's just a bunch of double track, not a ton of single track. So you're just running double track up on the rim in the forest. And so that was good to link it up, be forced to link it up during a race. And then I've run the whole last 36 of the course, in different sections, because it's all right around, Fort Tuthill State Park, which is mile 90, I think, of the 125 course, which would be mile 213 of the Cocodona 250 course. That's, all our backyard. Like, I live on the southeast side of town. I run on the Arizona Trail on this side of town. I run at Campbell Mesa that it cuts through. I ran Eldon today, so I was on the course today for my lunch run. So I run all that stuff all the time. So it's super familiar. I don't even really have to even think about where the course goes. If the flags were gone, I would know exactly where to go.
Yeah, right in your own backyard. You spend a lot of time down there. How long have you been in the Flagstaff area?
2.5, a little over 2 years. So we moved here March of 2021.
From Logan?
From Bozeman. So we had bounced around a lot. Like, we were in Bend, Oregon for 17 years. And then in 2017, we moved to Logan, Utah for a couple years, ended up in Bozeman for a couple years, and then kind of settled in Flagstaff. So
look, you decades of running and all the experience. How in the world, with so many races, how do you decide which races you're going to do now?
Oh man, it's always like kind of late fall is when I'm trying to decide all that. And a lot of times it's picking 1 or 2 races that I'm really stoked about, and then I fill in from there, depending on what I want to do. But I like to do hundreds. I like to keep racking them up. I enjoy that distance. The 200s, I'm not, you're not going to probably see me doing like the Triple Crown or anything, just because I that doesn't really speak to me that much. Like that seems more of too big of a suffer fest of running a lot of slow miles for 3 races in a row. And I like just like kind of showing up and performing at a 200. That's my idea of fun, and that's what I did with like Moab. I wanted to show up and nail the course as much as I could the first time. And then Cocodona, I feel the same way. I just want to show up. It's my backyard. I know half the course. I've already run multiple sections of the first 125. I just need to link them more up this winter. And that gives me a project for the winter, which I'm excited about. Is just a, reason to go down to the desert and camp out and scout, on two-day excursions type thing. So I just always look for stuff I'm drawn to, and I go there, and then I just fill it in from there, whatever I feel like. Sometimes it's training, last minute training, 50Ks or 50 milers, and sometimes it's planned.
Yeah. I mean, some of us, are actually getting older. I don't think you're aging at all, but I haven't been running a whole lot, maybe 7 or 8 years, but I'm to the point in my career where I'm like, yeah, I just want to do new stuff. I want to do new race every year because there's so many beautiful courses that I don't want to repeat the same one all the time. I've done that multiple times with other races, and I'm kind of now at the point where I'm like, yeah, if I'm going to go train and then travel, like I kind of want to do something new, something fresh. What's a race out there that you've done that you don't think gets as many signups or as many looks as you think it should? It's like a hidden gem. Like, dude, you got to try that race before it's all said and done.
I can name a couple of Rocky Mountain races that I think don't get enough. Well, I mean, Bighorn is one of them. I think Scout Mountain 100's another. I think Luke's put together a really beautiful course. It's easy to crew. In Pocatello, those mountains are sweet. It's a June race, so it fits in with anybody that needs to, like, for the people who are trying to get into like Western states for years and years, you should be putting a hard 100 in June every year to get your body ready for that. Because so that way, when you get into Western states, you'll be like totally primed and ready, and like be like, okay, I am like ready for this race. I feel like that's I get a lot of feedback from people who have had to wait, 8 years to get into hard rock. By the time they get in, they're veterans. You know what I mean? Like they started entering when they're kind of newbies and they wanted to do that race, but it set them up for success because they had to keep their qualifiers every year, and you have to keep doing a hard 100, pretty hard Rocky Mountain style 100 every single year or every other year. And that keeps you primed and practiced for when you actually get in. That sets you up for success. And I think the same thing can happen with, running a race that time of year, even because it's hard to train in the spring in some locales. We have this year, especially for where you guys live, you had tons of snow. So late snow, and we did too. And so that it's always a challenge to run those kind of races. You need to know what it's going to be like. So I think it's good to practice and run races like that. And Pocatello is a beautiful course. And you get a little bit of hard rock. It's early enough. There is a little bit of snow on the course. And I like it because you get a little bit of hard rock style running because there's usually a little snow on Scout Mountain and Old Tom. So both of those summits are really cool and hard, and it's a gorgeous course.
Yeah. Hard rock and Western, I'm still putting in every year, making sure I qualify for them and trying to get into them. Those are kind of the big ones for a lot of us that have, trying to at least accomplish some really cool things in our running careers. I had the Tahoe 200 on my list this year, and due to, all the snow, it got postponed. Right. So I deferred to next year, which means I didn't have a hard rock qualifier this year. So I last minute, just a few weeks ago, signed up for Mogollon Monster.
Oh yeah. That's a good course too.
Yeah. I was going to say, you've got to be familiar with that, because I certainly am not. I signed up going, well, it's a qualifier and I've never been there and I'm down to see new places, and it looks tough, the terrain, 18,000 feet of vert. What can you tell me about that course?
I ran it in my first year here, 2021. I think I ran it in fall of 21. It's cool. It's very technical, especially the Highline Trail, which is the base trail that it comes down to if you look at that course, it kind of runs up into the rim and back down and up into the rim and back down along the bottom of the rim and back up. And it constantly is kind of running up on the rim and then back down. So all the sections going up into the rim, the last mile is really steep. So when you're coming off the rim or going up into the rim and onto the rim, it's very steep. And then it mellows out as it goes down to the Highline Trail, and the Highline traverses at the base of the rim down in the desert. The only thing with the Highline Trail is it's very technical. If anybody out there is familiar with, I'm going to draw a blank on the name of the race. It's been around forever in Arizona, 50 miler. Zane Grey 50 is well known for being a crazy technical rocky race. It's on the Highline Trail. So that is the baseline of the Mogollon course. So the middle part of the course up on the rim, the cabin, what everybody calls the cabin loop, that section's really sweet, rolly, single track and Ponderosa Forest, amazing, drops through some creek beds, and it's really a cool section of the course. But the Highline Trail definitely kicks your butt. Be ready for that. It's going to be slow and it's rolly, not a lot of it doesn't have a ton of climbing in that section, but it's just so, like, I remember when I was running it, I wanted the course record and I didn't get it. I think I had the second fastest time. And during the night is when I knew I wasn't going to get it, because I was running on the Highline Trail. It's like in the Washington Park area. So it's like after 100K. So you dropped off the cabin loop and then you're running down on the Highline Trail. And I remember I was running every uphill. I was running everything. And I would look and then my watch would go off and it'd be like 1430 mile. And I just ran everything, like working, because you're just like bouncing and jumping and like juking over rocks and hopping over things. And you can't ever like open up your stride. So it's always just choppy, quick steps through rocky. And I remember thinking, man, I cannot get a break on pace. You know, I'm losing time on, because I had splits, you know, on my wrist. I had it written down on like a business card style splits for like what I needed to get if I was going to get the course record. And I just kept losing it in that section. I was like on it through like 100K. And then I hit nighttime and technical, and I couldn't keep a consistent pace. It just really it throws it at you. That I'm glad it's very deceptive course. It's a great hard rock qualifier because it is hard. You know, it's really technical in spots the last 30 miles are really technical too. I mean, there are some fire roads in there, some gravel roads, but the Turkey Spring section is really hard. What is that? Probably in like 80s, right around 80, that hard. And then the last like 10 miles is really technical, coming off the rim. And then you can see the lights of town, and then you have to like climb back up and traverse above town, and you're looking at lights, but you have to run clear to the far end, south end of town, and then run back up through town. So you think you're almost there, and then you start climbing away from town and above town, and you're like, am I ever going to go down into town? You know, luckily I had scouted it, or else it would have gotten my head, you know, before the race. Because I went down there for like 2 weeks out, spent like a couple days doing using my bike as like a commuter so I could like run point to point on the course. So I'd like, you know, leave my car at the trailhead where I was going to finish. And then I would get on my bike early in the morning, like first light when there's no traffic on the road. And I would ride all the way out on the course, stash my bike, run back, and then go get my bike.
It does look deceptive in that I say it's only 18,000 feet of vert, at least advertised on the website. But the times that I looked at of runners, top 10, top 20, are much longer in time than you would anticipate for that type of vert. Now it makes a lot of sense, right? It's all technicality. You can't open up stride up or down. You're chopping at stuff all the time.
You are just engaged the whole time. Like you can't really let down, like mentally. And I think that's the hardest part of that race. And it comes at you pretty hard than the last like 40 miles, where everyone's in the dark, and you're just like trying to run on super technical terrain in the dark. bad shadows casting off the back sides. There's such big boulders and boulder jumbled junk. And it is really technical. I mean, I remember thinking after I got done, I was like, that's one of the most technical courses I've ever been on.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know if it is the most technical, but it's one of the top 3 that I've ever been on.
I mean, I have some experience, but the Hurt 100 falls in that category of technical for me.
Yeah, it's super technical too. I think what helps it with Hurt is that you do that loop so many times that you start to dial in the technical sections by the 4th or 5th lap. If you really are, you kind of know, oh, I go right there or I go left there. But this is all point to point, so it's all new and you don't know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes Hurt easier, in my opinion, mentally. It makes it harder because you're at start finish every 20 miles, which makes you want to drop out because you're like, I could just stay right here in my hotel room's right down the road, but you have to overcome that part. But this is a really cool course. It's a cool wild course, in my opinion. Like, just there's not that many people down there. Pine's really small. There's not a big population down in that part of Arizona. It's far enough away from Flagstaff. It's an hour and a half from where we are. I mean, there's lots of Sasquatch legend down there. So
yeah, there is. There's
been a lot of that's like some of the highest sightings in the state. So kind of cool too. You always feel like, I have to say, when I was training there by myself, there's times I felt like something was watching. You ever get that feeling that something's watching you? Like if you've been in the woods enough and you've been a hunter or something like that. Now it could be, I'm sure for me personally, I take that as something is watching me, whether it's a mountain lion, a bear, whatever it is. But there is definitely some like, it is a thick wood in there. And there's not a lot of population down there. I can see how Sasquatch would, especially if they're nocturnal or something. I was listening to a Sasquatch podcast recently with my 12-year-old for fun. And it's kind of cool to hear some of the specialists talk about, there being a possibility of some kind of crazy hominid.
Well, yeah, that race does have like a YouTube video and some stuff on their website and in their emails that, hey, something's out there. There's stories. It's kind of a cool legend. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be so different from anything I've ever ran that's probably what gets me most excited to get up and
I can't think of very many races that are much like that race. Yep. As far as like the terrain and the technicality and the mix of like Ponderosa Forest up on the rim, and then the kind of transition zone as you climb up, and then all the desert stuff down below. It's a really cool course.
And that I'm super looking forward to that. Living here on the Wasatch Front, Utah, you get all the beautiful stuff around here, but that is just a different course. It's still at
your trails are buff compared to what you're going to see at Mogollon.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I can mimic the training at Mogollon up here, but I'm doing my best,
Right.
So, hey, in this, you're also, I want to jump categories just a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that you're a coach. You've been coaching for how long now? How many men and women are you coaching?
I've been coaching now since 2016. So what is that? 4 or 5, 6, 8 years, I guess, going on my 8th year. So getting close to a decade, of coaching. This year I hired, I was pretty busy last year. So I brought on a few coaches, cause I've been full for a while. So I coach, usually 30 some athletes, myself. And then we have about another 20 or 30 athletes that are getting coached by our other coaches. 20, I think, something like that. I think we probably have 50 some on our roster. And we have room with our other coaches. I'm still full right at the moment, but it's good. And they're coaches I've mentored for 4 or 5 years. So you're going to get my philosophy and my, the way I think with mobility and strength and nutrition, and the way we approach training. Our training philosophies are very similar. They're not robots. They think for themselves, but they're sharp all in their own, and they all have their own specialties, each of them. So Yeah, you can check them out on my website.
which is gobroncobilly.com, right?
Correct.
So of course I have to ask about the nickname and the name Bronco Billy. There's a story behind it. What is that story?
I was a big climber in the late 90s, and a buddy of mine that I climbed with was from Wyoming, and we would always say giddy up anytime it was for anything climbing. So like, hey, you need to make this move. Someone's like on the wall, like thinking about the move, but they haven't made the move, and they're kind of like starting to get sketched out on the wall. You'd be like, giddy up, or after they'd stick something, you'd yell, giddy up, So it had a lot of connotations, and it really spoke to me, growing up on a farm in the Midwest, being kind of a country boy at heart. I love that term, and I started using it a lot with, he and I use it all the time, constantly. We climbed a lot together. And when I moved to Oregon, I moved away from Colorado and where he was, and he moved and did his own thing. And, as we were growing up, as we were in our later 20s, I moved on to Oregon, and I was hanging out with a buddy of mine I was just dabbling in ultras, and I paced him at Wasatch in 2003, and which made me want to do Wasatch as my second 100. And that whole year we were training together, and he jokingly, is of Norse descent, and he would say he was a direct descendant of the Berserker tribe. And so I would call him Berserker. I coined his nickname Berserker. And because I was yelling giddy up all the time, he started calling me Bronco Billy. I don't know where he got it. I have never asked him where he got it. It became kind of a joke between the two of us. And then when a couple other people kind of jokingly started calling me Bronco Billy just out of fun in that running circle. And then I started a blog in 2003 or 2004. I started a blog, and I was looking for a URL to kind of show my family in the Midwest kind of what these crazy 100-miler things I was doing, what ultramarathons were, and because they didn't know, and I was doing race reports. And then blogs got popular, and so I was looking for Bronco Billy. First I looked for jeffbrowning.com, then I looked for broncobilly.com. Neither one was available. So I was like, well, being a branding and marketing and graphic designer, I was like, well, I need an action word. And what happens if I get injured and I can't run again, and I can only ride my mountain bike, because I was a big mountain biker. And so I was like, well, I need an action word. I can't have like run Bronco Billy, because what if I quit running? So that's where Go Bronco Billy came from. Just adding the word go to the front of it, and it was available. And I got gobroncobilly.com and started blogging, and then blogs got really popular. And then, and I jokingly in my race reports used Bronco Billy as my alter ego, to tell a funny story and say, you don't let him out of the stable until until the second half of the race, because, he's chomping at the bit, stomping his hooves, and,
as soon as he can see the barn, right?
Yeah, man, and then he just wants to get back to the barn. So, as fast as possible. So it became kind of a joking, way to visualize racing strong the second half of a race as well. So it became kind of an alter ego, so to speak, out of fun. And then, of course, being in branding and marketing, I was an early adopter of Google everything, and, all the social media stuff and Facebook. So I grabbed all the Go Bronco Billy handles for everything, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And
now you own them all, and that's how we can all find you and bug you and hit you up for tips and follow your race reports.
Yeah, so Bronco Billy just kind of became its own thing.
Cool, man. So at 52 years old and 29 100-mile wins, the speed goat himself, right? Carl Meltzer's got upwards of 45, 40 something plus, 47. And how much do you guys talk about that? Do you guys talk about that at all, or is it just like, no, it's one of those like things that's just out there? And
Carl always comments every time I win, we know each other. We've trained together before. We've been sponsored by similar brands and done some pretty big adventure runs together over the years. Just the two of us. And, I think, it's a friendly, we like to joke about it, but he is like so far ahead that he's kind of untouchable. You know what I mean? Like he was running, like, I mean, this is nothing against Carl at all, but he was just running at a time in the 2000s when, his times of winning Wasatch, I've run around the same times and been fourth or fifth. Right. So, or, you even look at like Scott Jurek's times, look at like, for example, Scott's winning times at Western States for his 7 wins in a row. Some years when I was in the top 10, I've run faster than Scott a couple times. In some of those years he won, and I was barely in the top 10 at Western States with those times. It just shows you how much faster in the last decade the times have really been thrown down, and you have to up your game. I think that's what sticks out to me the most. It's the most interesting. Like, that's why I say he's untouchable. Like, I would have to go cherry pick so many different 100-milers to try to get that many wins. And I don't know, that isn't that important to me to do that. I'd rather just go run
that
cool races.
That doesn't seem as much fun, right? Just go.
No, it doesn't sound fun at all. So,
yeah, no.
It's a trip. I really think it's interesting to see where the sport has evolved, and it really shows like it's become more professional. It's definitely. I mean, we have a lot of athletes that are not even working now. And Carl was working winters and then dirt bagging it during the summer, and Scott was a PT. During a lot of those years. So before he got sponsored by Brooks, and so like I think that it's a different sport now, it's professional.
Absolutely. It's a different, I mean, it's with social media, with the internet even coming alive, like full-fledged, it's become so incredibly global that winning at the highest level consistently is very, very difficult. You look at, Western and Hard Rock just this year, 2023, right? Europeans come over and take the entire podium at Hard Rock.
Yeah.
And, you try to compete against stuff like that, or you go to Europe and it's a totally different playground of mountains and climbing. But at 52 and what you've accomplished, what are you going for? Maybe you can't answer it. Maybe it's too hard, but like, what is, I don't want to say the end goal, but what is the goal? What's on your mind? Like, how are you just going to keep going as long as you can compete at a high level, or what are you thinking?
I mean, at this point, I'm just trying to see, well, I'm motivated still to train hard and do all the little stuff. I've created at this point, I've created a lifestyle with a full-time coaching thing that allows me to, it allows me enough free time to train regularly and intelligently and be able to do the little things like strength and mobility and nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And for me, I'm thinking of it more as my own like system I've developed, that for some sort of longevity, that's what I'm after now is longevity. I'll keep competing as long as I'm motivated and as long as I can win. But even when I can't, I'll just mentally shift to more social and mentoring role in our space. For me personally, that's my plan, is just to really just kind of pass on the knowledge I've acquired over, I'm in my 3rd decade of competing and racing these things. And how do we balance it with life and family? And, I'm coaching people that are, in their most of my people that I coach are, average age is 45, it's median age. So, I'm only coaching a few fast people, but I really enjoy coaching people who just want to get better at in their own space, right? For who they are and where they are and what age they are, and that they're happy and move well and have good mobility and good movement patterns going into older decades. And that way you enjoy life longer.
Yes. And now that you are into that, 20 plus years of competing at a high level, I think the average age of an ultra male runner is somewhere close to 40. That age seems to be coming down with time. I just saw that the youngest finisher of Badwater, 18-year-old female, just finished Badwater. So the sport is getting younger. What do you tell, 33-year-old Jeff Browning today? What do you tell that person?
Eat an animal-based diet and do strength training and mobility. Start it now. Start the habit now. Because I don't know. I just feel like the shift in nutrition for me was a huge kind of, this is overused, but game changer. For me personally, I kind of had a second wind in my career once I did that shift in 2016. If you look at my results from 2016 on, that was on OFM, and that was, really, really dialing in lifestyle diet. But also, like, I strength training's always been a part of my kind of regimen, and just fine tuning that and getting that kind of dialed in. Those two pieces, I think that's what I would tell 33-year-old Jeff. Really stay on the nutrition and stay on the strength training stuff.
You used an acronym, OFM, optimized fat metabolism. What exactly is that? What have you learned about that? What do you coach or your athletes on that on OFM? What is your mentality on that?
Well, we're trying to eat more mirror an ancestral diet is what we're thinking. So think, avoiding grains, sugar, and seed oils in your everyday diet. That's the simplest way to put it. So we're mainly eating, if you're going to rewrite the pyramid of the nutrition pyramid, the bottom half would be animal products and raw dairy and stuff like that. So that would be the bottom half. That's our foundation. We prioritize protein, and then in everyday diet. And then the top half of the pyramid would be like fruits and vegetables and fruits and starches. And then I would say fruits and vegetables, fruits and starches, then vegetables. And then the very tippy top would be like clear liquor, dark chocolate, the treats in the diet that would be in moderation, and then aren't staples. And then, and I coach athletes to be a 90-10 rule, 80-20 rule, 2 to 4 meals a week. Don't worry about it so much, but be on the straight and narrow 80 to 90% of the time, and stick to that food list that we're talking about, and avoid seed oils and avoid grains and avoid sugar. And then we use simple carbs like sugar, whether it's, Tailwind or, Goo Octane or Scratch or, gels or whatever it is, whatever works for you, or a Coke, doesn't matter. Use that during races and long runs, and use those simple carbs strategically. Time our carbohydrates. So we think about timing carbohydrates around effort and volume, especially after big efforts and volume. So you top glycogen off and you're ready to go, but always prioritizing protein as your baseline to really repair, and then using strategic carbohydrate to top off glycogen. And that's it in a nutshell. It's pretty simple. We do a keto reset to get you like your metabolic pathway to burn onboard fat opened up initially, but then we guide you through that. And then we slowly teach you to bring back strategic carbohydrates, and then be intuitive ongoing. The more 80-20, 90-10 rule. That's kind of how we guide athletes in that. Yeah, we have a lot of athletes coming to us who are wanting to do nutrition too.
Yeah, I think that's been a big thing for me as I'm now in my, I'm 44 now. I just, the last year or two, gotten a little more disciplined, a little more. And now I'm to the point where I'm like, okay, I got the raw dairy now. I got the so I'm more focused on the proteins and trying to get rid of the crap that we eat, with just running around, running a business and your kids and your family, trying to get rid of that stuff. But it is hard. It is hard to do that with all the demand that is life, right? That is like kids and spouse. You go eat out, or you got to like grab fast food because you're in between this and that. And how do you balance that with your family and what they need versus like, hey, I'm a trained athlete kind of trying to be athlete?
Well, I've luckily had a wife we've been a united front on the nutrition piece always. So we do the same thing, so she does a little bit different thing where she does more of what we call fuel separation method, where she separates her fats and carbohydrates. So protein's a constant, but whether it's a high fat protein or a low fat protein, she pairs it with carbohydrate if it's low fat. And if it's high fat protein, she pairs it with low carb. So that's your fuel sources, the fat or the carbohydrate. And so she does more of fuel separation method. But, we coach that as well, especially with our women athletes. I like to coach them a little differently than I do men. It's from a nutritional standpoint. They need a little more carbs and separating their fuels a little more strategically or a little more strictly usually benefits them quite a bit. Especially if they're an older female athlete. And, but, that helps to be a united front. Like I've coached multiple athletes over the years who had another spouse who wasn't willing to go there on the nutrition side. And it makes it really challenging because either you're cooking your own food or you're strategically abstaining from certain things on the table at dinner with your family. You're saying, no, I'm not eating that, but I'll eat that. Right. So, which makes, that makes it more challenging. We've just been a united front the whole time, and our kids have to get on board, and I would say my wife's more hardcore than I am. So if that gives you anything, she was a D1 gymnast in college and full ride scholarship. So she can be strict. Like she knows how to hold herself accountable and not need an external motivator besides herself. And so she drives that train a lot in our house.
In relationship to that comment about your wife, I think there's there's something that happens to ultra runners, or maybe just a lot of runners on their own. But a lot of them, from what I can tell, and you'll know better than I do as a coach and an experienced athlete, there's something about running and ultra running that is, you have to have this element of self-motivation. Like no one's going to get you out of bed. No one's going to write your stretching or your strength or your nutrition program. You might write it for one of your athletes, but I don't know if they're going to follow it. So what's that balance like between being a coach and writing a training program and then saying, here you go, Mr. or Mrs., it's up to you. You got to be self-motivated to do this, because no one in this sport gets by without being self-motivated.
Well, I think that's why we have so many recovering addicts in our sport, because they're funneling that addiction into training and nutrition and strength training and mobility. And they can, once they shift that and build that neural pathway to say, okay, I get up every day and I do this instead of going out and drinking, or instead of going to happy hour, I go train, right? Or whatever. So I think there is that aspect personality wise in our sport that's pretty strong. But I do think that most people who stick with ultra marathons are pretty self-motivated. Now they might be busy people. That's where coaching comes in. Coaching really benefits the busy person who has a really good job and is like, I don't have time to sit down and plan out my whole year. I just know I want to do this race, and I want to bounce it off a coach who says, that one's probably a little too close to the 100 miler, and you probably shouldn't do that, but maybe you could do a 50K instead of 100K, or whatever. Our job is to guide our athletes into intelligent training, and then give them the tools so they don't have to go do all the research. They don't have to go figure this out. We give it to them and kind of spoon feed them what they should do. And then they just need the motivation to go, okay, well, I have a 50 to 70 minute easy run today and a 21-minute strength training workout. I just got to fit that into my day somewhere. And they don't have to go think about what pace they should run, because I'm giving them that. This is the effort you should run it at. So I'm doing the umbrella. My coaches and I are doing umbrella training and thinking about the big picture and the weekly picture as it pertains to the A goal, the B goal, or whatever. And I think that's, motivation. That's what I love about this sport. It's not a jump off the couch and run a 5K, right? There's plenty of good athletes out there who are just like weekend warriors who could jump off a sofa literally and finish a 5K, right? And, you know, or just jump into 2 weeks of training real quick and last minute and go finish a 5K. But you can't do that with a 100-miler. You're not going to make it to the finish line. That's what I love about our sport. It pays to do the work and be consistent, and it pays off for people who are consistent and do the work. And I think that's what's cool about our sport, is you have to do the work.
I couldn't agree more. You have to be consistent. You can't just take a few weeks off, take a few days off, go knock out a 20-miler and think that it's helping you, right? It probably just hurt you more because you didn't have the base, you didn't have the structure, right, to just go knock that out. Now you got to recover for 5 days because you just tried to make up your mileage all at one time, right? And I think that,
you
that
can't
happens.
cram. It doesn't work. Cram training does not work. The body needs slow adaptation. It needs time, and it needs consistency and little stimuluses, not gigantic stimuluses all at one time. You know, that's why we have to respect the recovery after big ultras. And a lot of people get injured. There's two places that people get the most injured. One is in the build and the peak of training, and the other is in the 3 weeks after an event, because they do too much too soon. It's in those 2 windows of time when you're the most at risk for injury. When your volume is high and your fatigue is high, and and it really depends on your base coming into that period. So sometimes you can lay it on a little too thick in that 2 or 3 week window of peak. And the other is after a race when you're super stoked and you're like, you're looking for that next challenge, but your body's not ready for the next challenge yet. It needs recovery. So it teaches you patience. It teaches you to be intuitive and listen to your body, because everybody's different. Like, we have to teach that to athletes. Like, I can put one athlete back running 5 days after a 100-miler, and another one needs 10 days, you know, depending on their background and depending on who they are and if they have imbalances and how strong their base is, and a whole bunch of other factors that go into like whether they can handle coming back sooner or not. Some need a month of really easy stuff before they can even think about building their volume again. And some can be building in week 2 already, you know, because they have, you know, years in the sport, or they've been consistent for a decade. You know, I can definitely do a lot more now than I used to be able to. Like, I can jump right back into training pretty quickly, and I didn't used to be able to do that. I get injured.
Yeah. With that being said, as a coach, what is one of the biggest mistakes that the everyday, you know, non-elite runner, what are the mistakes we're making? Just one of the biggest ones that you see when you pick up a new client or a group of clients, that first mistake that you can just pick it out right off the bat that they're doing wrong.
Usually within a couple weeks, if they're running too much volume or too many of their miles a little in the metabolic gray zone, meaning comfortably hard, because they're crunched for time. They want to get in as much mileage sandwiched in. They're busy people, and they're like trying to run those runs too fast. So instead of like being at the appropriate effort, right? 80+% of your volume should be below aerobic ceiling, meaning below your aerobic threshold, not anaerobic, aerobic. So too many people, you know, train too hard a lot, like kind of chronically slightly hard, and you don't really get the adaptation. You just get all the fatigue and all the stress without good adaptation. I think that's number one. Number two is just biting off more than you can chew, because people get into the sport a little bit and they get kind of addicted to the scene and the community, and they want to do more races, and they see other people out there doing tons of racing and back-to-back racing, but not understanding it in context that person maybe has been doing it for 20 years or 15 years consistently with no setbacks, right? Because they've intelligently trained for the first 5 years and only maybe did 2 to 3 ultras a year. And then all of a sudden they started doing, you know, after 10 years of running and consistency, they started running like 6 a year and back-to-back hundreds and stuff like that. But you don't see all the foundation they built, but you want to be in their shoes too quick. So I think that's another one that's a really challenging for people to kind of, you always have to look at it in context and where you are personally, and like baby steps, because the body needs to adapt. And so consistency is key. to endurance training. Just being consistent. It's even more important than just, hitting a long run every single week. I'd rather see you run just every, 5-6 days a week consistently for months and months and months and months, and maybe skip some of your long runs because you're crunched for time, than to just, skip a bunch of runs during the week and then only get your long run in and only like another run in, and you're overdoing it. Because
I think you just described me perfectly. I run too hard too many times a week because I only have so much time, and now I'm finding myself cramming for 100 milers. So you just described me perfectly.
Yeah, and I think the other is making running a lifestyle sport. I think that's an important piece to success in our sport, is just carving that little window of time every single day that you do something and that you get it in. And because the consistency is what is key to longevity and to success in the sport, and injury prevention and everything else, is just practicing that discipline regularly. And if you're busy, you have to cut it short. But, one of my favorite quotes, and who influenced Bill Bowerman, who coached Steve Prefontaine, is Arthur Lydiard from New Zealand. Is a coach of the last century, last century. One of his famous quotes is 15 minutes is of value. And I think that's an important piece to remember when you're training. If you're crunched for time, you're like, man, I'm not going to be able to get my hour run in today, but can you get 15 in? Then get 15 in and call it good and move on to the next day. Right. So that's how I always am trying to guide athletes, is just 15 minutes is of value. So go do it. Prioritize strength, and prioritize protein, and you'll be in a pretty good spot.
My man, I appreciate it. I think this has been incredibly insightful. I typically end my show with a list of questions. You've already answered them, so I don't need to go through the typical 3. But my final question for you is, because this is the Next Aid Station podcast, we talk a lot about the next aid station mentality, which very well as a runner, is just get to the next aid station, whatever it takes to get up out of that chair and take forward momentum steps to get there. You will have setbacks in your race, in your training, in life. Is there a moment off the top of your head, Jeff, that comes to mind where as an elite athlete, you weren't where you wanted to be, and something happened to you that was not planned, and it set you back either in your personal life, in your career, and you had to get to this mentality of the next aid station? I got to get to the next aid station. I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about something in life that was tough for you to get through, where you had to use this racing mentality to get to the next aid station in life.
Yeah. I mean, it takes me back to 2000. For me personally, it was 2015. I was having a bunch of health issues. I've talked about this on other podcasts, but in more detail. But I was having a bunch of GI issues with kind of a candida yeast overgrowth in my GI tract. And I wasn't sure what it was exactly, but it was after some travel and drinking some questionable water and, a whole bunch of other stuff. And I was having these kind of rashes and flare-ups, kind of yeast based stuff going on, candida. And this is what pushed me to go OFM and to do the high fat, low carb approach. Initially was to starve out the yeast feeds on sugar. And so anything you eat, any carbohydrate, whether it's a candy bar or an apple, is converted, or a vegetable. They're all a carbohydrate, and your liver converts them to glucose in the bloodstream. So understanding, I had a really good grasp on nutrition at that point. Had been following a Whole Foods organic diet for a lot of years, like 12, 13 years at that point. And I was just trying to figure out, I was working like baby steps towards this thing of like educating myself more, understanding candida, what it fed on, and how do I kind of go from one aid station to the next. Just like, all I got to do is like look in the headlights in front of me and figure out where I need to go next. And then, okay, now I'm here. Now, which door do I go through? Door number 1, door number 2, and so it was very much like the mentality of aid station to aid station. And I got through it. And I just kind of like opened those doors as I came to them. It led me down a really cool path. And I feel blessed to have come down that path, because it really showed me a lot of things about what was wrong with our mainstream nutrition and the dogma that was in research, and who's funding it, and where, who's paying for it and paying for certain outcomes to happen. I understood all that on a basic level, but that really got me down into rabbit holes during that time. And it was definitely aid station to aid station.
Wow. Hey, Jeff, it's been phenomenal catching up with you. Everyone, Jeff Browning, you can find him at Go Bronco Billy on Instagram, gobroncobilly.com. And let's make sure that, we pay attention to what we're eating for our strength training and staying locked in and self-motivated. I want to apologize now to my good friend Survivors, Jeff Probst. We couldn't get him on, but we got our other favorite, Jeff Browning, on the show today. Thank you for listening. This has been the Next Aid Station Podcast.
Giddy up.